Today we're talking about personal and moral integrity. What is personal and moral integrity? And what is the difference between personal integrity and moral integrity? It's one of those things that just popped into my head some time ago. And I started thinking about this because of a quote from Sam Walton, who is the founder of Walmart. And he once said this. He said, personal and moral integrity is one of our basic fundamentals, and it starts with each of us. And I heard that quote, and I thought to myself, well, he said that like there's a difference between the two of them. So what does it really mean? And then it suddenly occurred to me that moral integrity is knowing what's right, and personal integrity is doing what you believe is right. Then I thought about how there's a lot of people who do things that they believe are right, and they'll even make great sacrifices to do those things. And yet sometimes those things are based on a lie, and those people are fundamentally wrong. And yet they have personal integrity because they are true to their self. They are doing what they believe to be right, and there's a certain honor in that. And yet there's also a certain fault, because if you believe in things which are false, if you believe in lies, then that's the opposite of moral integrity. So you can have personal integrity because you're doing what you believe to be right, but you can lack moral integrity because what you're doing is wrong. And by the same measure, you can have a lot of moral integrity because in every turn you have a solid idea of what's right. Your compass is pointing in the right direction, but you're not following the dictates of your own conscience, so it doesn't really matter, because you can have all the light in the world, but if you're following a path of darkness, does it really make a difference? So what you really need is both of those things. You need to know the truth, and then you need to be set free by that truth. One of my favorite classical deities is Hecate, the goddess of mysticism and witchcraft and things of that nature, kind of a Wiccan deity. And actually Hecate, I believe, is the mother of Persephone, I think. In any case, I think Persephone was sent to the underworld, and she became the wife of Hades, I think. I think that's how it worked. And then Hecate is her mother, and Hecate is a sort of a trinity of characters, 3 in 1. Sometimes Hecate is represented as 3 individual people together, and sometimes represented by like 1 person with 6 arms or something like that. But you'll see Hecate holding a dagger and a key and 3 torches and a snake. And what does it all mean? Well, the 3 torches represent the underworld, and the middle world, which is where we live in our living lives, and then the upper world, which is what you'd think of as heaven, or maybe a place where we go after we die. And you could also describe those things as just the destiny of the past and the present and the future, because we all have something that precedes us, and we all have a place where we're going, and we all have a place where we are. And even if we didn't understand it, all those things are part of a greater story, a destiny. And then you have her holding a key and a snake. And, well, a snake will lose its skin. Snakes shed their skin. And so the snake represents rebirth. It represents dying to your old self and becoming something new. And then, of course, there's the key, which represents truth, represents opening a door to a new place by embracing, again, something new. So perhaps to fuse this with Christian lore, we could say you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. That's really what that means. And then, of course, there's the dagger. And when we think of a dagger, we perhaps think of combat, but really what it actually symbolizes is the cutting, the severing of ties. There's things that hold us back. There's things that are toxic in our lives. And as long as we hang on to those things, we can't move forward. We can't unlock those new doors. We can't illuminate our future. We can't embrace the destiny that is meant for us until we sever the cords that bind us. But that does take a certain degree of courage. Now, I want to diverge a little bit and tell the story of two Christian men. And it doesn't really matter whether these are real people or not. One of them is the boss. The other one is a bit lower on the food chain in the company. We'll call them Boss Bob and Tom. Well, Boss Bob always talks crap about Tom. Tom's just a nobody, right? Tom doesn't do his job very well. Tom's not really got the talent. Tom's more of a problem than he is an asset. Boss Bob has nothing good to say about Tom. Well, the truth of the matter is, behind the scenes, both of them are Christians. Both of them believe that they should be serving the Lord. And Boss Bob, maybe he tithes 10% of his income. But does it really matter if you're giving 10% when you're making a lot of money? Well, sure. But it's not the same as Tom, who gives everything he has to his family and to his church. Then Tom quits his job and he goes overseas to be a missionary. And Boss Bob says, well, good riddance, we can backfill that position. That guy wasn't any good anyway. And Tom goes over to a third world country, and Tom builds a church. Him and others from his church, they build this building one brick at a time. It takes shape. And people admire the work that Tom has done, because Tom has sacrificed his whole life. He gave up his job. He went overseas to do this thing because that's what he believed he should do in his heart. Boss Bob, actually, if he wasn't a jealous, ignorant man, he would appreciate that. He would admire that. But really, he just dismisses that. Because, it's actually called conviction. When somebody else does what you should be doing, but you don't have the courage. So you just stay quiet and you just do what's in your interest. But when you see somebody else sacrifice everything, well, even if you don't have the courage to acknowledge it, you still feel a little bit guilty. Then Tom comes down with some illness out there, and Tom dies, and everybody forgets about Tom. But Boss Bob, sitting there in the comfort of his office, while he judges people and criticizes people, he knows that he believes the same things as Tom. But Tom proved with his actions and with his life that he believed those things enough to give his life, while Boss Bob doesn't give anything other than what's convenient, so he can pay lip service to saying that he has faith. Eventually, life goes on. That's just a story of two men. One of them had personal integrity. The other one did not. Now, we could argue about whether building a church somewhere off in the Philippines or something is worth leaving your job and dying for. Maybe that's where you get into the moral integrity part of it. Because if you sacrifice your life for something that isn't even necessarily worth sacrificing it for, that could be another form of delusion in itself. But that's not the point I'm getting at. The point I'm getting at is we fail ourselves when we believe we should do something, and then we choose to ignore our inner voice. There's another Bible story that I really like, and it's about Paul. Paul was a Christian missionary in the New Testament, and that would have been the Roman times when being a follower of Jesus was something which would potentially get you put in prison. And so Paul's in prison, and then this centurion comes along, I believe. I think he's a centurion, or he was an officer in the Roman military. I think that's how it was. Well, anyway, this officer comes to Paul, who's in prison for his faith, and this officer likes what he hears. It sounds good. It sounds right. It sounds just. And he knows that his office is persecuting Paul for his faith. So now he has this contradiction, a paradox. And he knows he wants to leave his way of life and convert. But he also fears the implications. He would lose his job. He would lose his position. He'd lose his respect. He might even lose his life. So he said, this sounds good. I will come and find you again at a time which is convenient for me. He said, when the time's better, then I'll circle back, and then we'll talk about this some more. But there is no record in that story of him ever returning. See, when we wait for a convenient time to do what's right, and we say we're going to just kind of keep the blinders on for a while, because facing life with our eyes wide open is too inconvenient. The time when it becomes convenient often never avails itself. And so we wind up in chains to lies for our entire life. There's never going to be a time when you can embrace the truth without having to go through some form of inconvenience to surrender your old ways. And that's where we tie in that moral integrity concept. Now, quite often, personal integrity will lead you to discover a certain moral integrity, because if you do what you believe is right, quite often, that will lead you to discover truths that you had not discovered or thought of before. Now, even if we pursue these things, sometimes we can try to know the truth and we still don't know the truth. If you asked people what the truth was, the greatest minds of the world 200 years ago would not know the truth as well as we know the truth today, because we have more technological understanding than people in that time did. And yet, even today, we don't really know the truth. We might know a little bit more of the truth, but we still see through a glass. And so there is a need for humility, and there's a need for soul searching. There's a need to be faithful to our inner voice and our compass, and also to be not too certain that we are right. And it takes courage to acknowledge what you do not know, especially when you're living in a world full of people who act like they're convinced of the truth. Even if they're lost, even if they don't know the truth, they still have a mantra that they try to push, an agenda they try to sell. So it's not popular to say, I don't know. And yet, it's necessary to say, I don't know, if you don't know. We don't really know where we've come from or where we're going. We don't really know what or who God is. We don't know very much, truthfully. That leads me to a final conclusion, though, because you can think yourself into a box when you feel like you have to work through a lot of things. Sometimes it's good to just feel your way through life, because it's totally possible to overthink things so much that you lose sight of what really makes the human experience worth having. I was reading an article about how there's a high rate of suicide in surgeons. I thought, well, maybe part of why that is that people in advanced medical fields tend to work long hours, they have a lot of stress, things like that. And I'm sure that's part of it. But I also thought maybe part of why this is because these people are usually very smart. They're intellectual, they're studied, and they start to see the human body much like a mechanic would look at a car. A collection of different parts that all work together to create the greater whole. And yet, because they understand so much, it starts to feel easier to just be disenfranchised with everything in life. It doesn't feel magical anymore. It feels mechanical. Maybe you started off a career once and you thought, my goodness, this company's so amazing to work for. I'm excited for this. And then you fast forward a decade or two and it doesn't feel that way anymore. And it's not really so much that the company changed, it's that you changed. Because there was a time when you saw it from the outside. You just saw it in a very superficial feeling sort of way. You didn't have to make sense of all of the different moving parts inside. But then there came a time when you understood all the inner workings better. You understood the internal politics. You understood all of the shenanigans. And then you started to realize there's nothing really special here. I thought that this was an amazing thing, but turns out just normal people doing normal things. So, imagination and inspiration, these things are just as important as knowledge because they contain a truth which in some ways is more pure than the sum of facts which we can learn and memorize, but we can't feel them. We are feeling creatures. Ultimately, whether we choose to look at life through the eyes of faith or we choose to look at it through the eyes of science, if you're honest, you have to acknowledge that we're spiritual creatures. And you can't deny that, because if you do deny that, then you deny everything that makes you human. It's like playing games. Why are computer games cool? We could war game it out. We could analyze it to death. We could say, well, here's the technical reason why they're good for the brain, or they're good for building social connections with others maybe, or they're a form of escapism, or whatever it might be. We can analyze the whole experience, but really, you don't need to. It's enough to say they're cool just because they are. Like when I was a child, of course I wanted a remote control car to bounce it around in the grass and just have fun with it. There was no need for me to explain why. I didn't need to explain why because the fact that it was cool was self-evident. So we're going to close this with 3 thoughts. And the first is to have personal integrity, to do what you believe is right. The second is to have moral integrity, to be willing to open your eyes and pull back the curtain of convenience, to seek truth, even if that means that you have to make some sacrifices or change your worldview as you go in order to be true to that. And the third is to keep a childlike sense of imagination and wonder and curiosity and faith and spiritual joy. Because even though doing what you believe to be right is important and seeking the truth is important, it's also important just to do things that feel good to you, to keep alive the sense of wonder that comes from all of those things that transcend understanding, that transcend measurable knowledge. and fall more in the category of spiritual wellness. They're not things that we can define, but they're things we know by their fruits. We know these things because when we embrace them, we feel like there is hope in our lives. And when we close the door on them, we feel like something's lost. If something makes you feel lost, then don't do it. If it makes you feel found, then pursue it. And understand that it's okay to change those things from time to time, because sometimes what inspires us today isn't going to be what inspires us in the future. Sometimes our tastes can change. That's okay. But being true to that childlike pursuit of wonder is often a first step toward finding the path to the moral and personal integrity that I've been talking about earlier. Try to have all three: the faith of a child and the courage to do and seek that which is right. As always, on your journey, very best of luck. Till next time. Thank you.